Hello everyone, my name is Filip Siderov and I'm a senior JavaScript developer at SAP. We're here today to talk about web components. So, without losing any time, let's jump right into the agenda. Today we are going to talk about the concept and the idea of web components. After that, we are going to deep dive into the 4 standards that are used to implement web components. And in the end, we are going to take a look at how the SAP ecosystem benefits from web components. So, the idea of web components dates exactly 10 years back. It was first introduced in 2011 as a draft, and after that, it has gone through a couple of changes. But web components is a standard to create HTML tags that are reusable and can be used in different web applications or web pages. Currently, all of the major browsers support web components, so it is a perfect time even if you want to build enterprise-ready solutions with them. The community around web components here now lives up to the expectation of answering questions and providing help for people that might need it. Basically, the concept around web components is that web components are the native way of sharing UI elements across different solutions. You won't need some technology-specific thing or a framework or whatever you might think of. And this leads to my next thing in my head, which is that web components are framework agnostic, which means that they can work with any framework that is currently out there on the market or even any future framework, as long as that framework works on top of HTML. Web components really simplifies the code that you have, which improves readability and maintainability. It also reduces the application size, which of course leads to more simple debugging. Of course, if we take a look at the future, web components is something that will lead to consistency across different solutions in the future, since it can be used in different technology stacks. Of course, web components is based on something. As we already mentioned, it is based on 4 different web standards. These are the custom elements, shadow DOM, HTML templates, and ECMAScript modules. Right now, we're going to take a look at each of them individually. First, we're going to start with custom elements. So, how do we define a custom element is the first and most important question. Just like any other built-in HTML element like div or span, for example, we will need a class that would be responsible for the behavior of the element. Of course, this class should extend the HTML element class that is built in the JavaScript. After we define the behavior that we need in that class, we need to define the custom element that we need. We can define it by using the custom elements.define method, which receives 2 parameters. The first one receives the tag that we're going to use later in our application. And the second parameter is the class that would be responsible for the behavior of that element. Once we do this, we are able to use the tag that we have just defined. How do we use it? We can see on the bottom of the slide. We use it just like a regular tag. There is nothing more specific than that. It is really straightforward. Okay, this is the main idea about custom elements. Now I want to share a couple of important rules. The first one is that the name must contain a dash. As you already saw, our cool button had a dash in its name. The reason for this rule is that browsers need to know whether a given element is a custom element or a native HTML element. And the check that they do is whether the name has a slash inside of it. The second rule that you need to remember about custom elements is that you cannot register the same tag more than once. This means that if you have a runtime dependency or something like that, you need to re-register the tag with another name. It cannot be the same. But as a rule of thumb, you should always aim to register a tag only once with all the features that you might need. And the third most important rule when it comes to custom elements is that custom elements cannot use self-closing tags. Although it might be very convenient at some times, this is not possible. So if you remember these three rules, you'll be ready to go for web components, or more specifically, custom elements. Now, let's go and talk a little bit more about Shadow DOM. Shadow DOM is the second standard that we're going to take a look. But first, before giving any example or sharing the benefits of Shadow DOM, I want to differentiate what the main differences between Shadow DOM and just a regular DOM. There are two differences. The first one is how Shadow DOM is created and after that used. And the second one is how it behaves in relation to the rest of the page. Both are really important, and we're going to see them in action after just a while. Before that, I want to share another thing that is good to be remembered. The element to which we attach the Shadow DOM is called Shadow Host, or perhaps just a host. We can call it just a host. So let's go through the benefits of Shadow DOM before giving any example. First, it isolates the DOM. A component DOM will be self-contained, and for example, selectors like document.querySelector won't return any nodes in the component's Shadow DOM because it is isolated. The CSS that we've got is scoped, which means that CSS defined inside of the Shadow DOM is scoped to it. Style rules don't leak out, and page styles do not bleed in, which leads to our third benefit that we've got when it comes to Shadow DOM. It simplifies the CSS that we've got for our application. Scoped DOM and scoped CSS means that you can use a simple CSS selectors or more generic ID and class names and not worry about naming conflicts between the names inside of the Shadow DOM and outside of the Shadow DOM. Another benefit of Shadow DOM is the composition. Classes might bring the idea of inheritance, but it is really easy to design a declarative markup-based API for your component by using composition. And last, but definitely not least, it is something very important, the productivity. Thinking of apps in chunks of DOM rather than one large page is really helpful when it comes to really huge and scalable applications. Now, after we talked so much about the benefits of Shadow DOM and why is it cool to be used, let's take a look at how can we use it. Now we're going to extend our example of the code button that we previously had. And here we can see the constructor method of it. First, we're going to code the super, which is the parent element constructor. And after that, we need to attach the shadow with this method, which is called attach shadow, to the code button. Here, as you can see, we can provide an object with some parameters. To be precise, there are two parameters that can be passed here. The first one is mode. The mode parameter has two values, open and closed. Here, we have set the mode to open, which means that elements of the shadow root are accessible from JavaScript that is outside of the root. For example, by using the element.shadowRoot property. The other possibility that we have is to set the mode to closed. If we set it to closed, it will deny access to the nodes of a closed shadow root from JavaScript outside of it, which means that we are not going to have any possible scenario where we can access the nodes inside of the shadow root. And after we have attached the shadow, we need to insert some inner HTML. In our example, we are adding some string boilerplate, which has an image inside of it and some hard-coded text. Once we define all of this, we can define our element inside of the browser. This is very cool. It works like a breeze. But now let's imagine that we want to expand our example. Right now, we have an image that is hard-coded, but some of the users of our web component might need to change that image. For this case, they need some way of adding their own markup inside of the template that we have currently used. Actually, web components provide a way to do so. This is called the SWOT element. The SWOT element, as you can see here, is added right now in the place of the image tag. And now some content that is passed from the developers will be placed inside of this SWOT element that we currently had. So basically, element might have 0 SWOTs or 1 SWOT or even more than 1 SWOT, but there must be only one default SWOT. If you have more than one SWOT, other SWOTs should be named with some names. Now, after we can see the implementation from our side, let's imagine that we are application developers using this component, and the HTML that we need to provide is as follows. We have the cool button tag, and inside of it, we should provide all the SWOTs that are needed for this component. In our case, it's only one. It is the image tag that we previously had hard-coded. Now it can be passed as a SWOT from the application developers. And here they can place the logo of their own company. In our case, this is the SAP logo. After we use the given HTML from the previous slide, let's take a look at what we can see in the browser. When we open the DevTools, we can see that the cool button is rendered. But the more interesting things are happening inside of the cool button tag. We can see that there are two things right beneath it. First, there is the shadow root, and after that, there is an image tag. If we expand the shadow root, we can see the boilerplate code that we had in our constructor method, and the SWOT more importantly. As you can see, the SWOT element is a little bit different HTML element, and it just directs to the image tag that is passed inside the so-called white DOM. Basically, everything that is outside of the shadow root, but it is inside the custom element cool button, is in the so-called light DOM. In our case, we have provided only one such thing, and this is our image tag. The important thing here is to remember the difference between the shadow DOM and the light DOM. Basically, the light DOM consists of the SWOTs that application developers are provided for our web component. Now, we have a component, we have given the developers some freedom, but we need to style this component because otherwise it will be very ugly. The next topic we're going to talk about is how can we style the shadow DOM. There are two approaches when it comes to styling. The first one is component-defined styles. This means that we can add whatever styles we like inside of the shadow DOM, just like in any regular HTML. This works out of the box, and this is the pretty straightforward solution. But sometimes, again, we want to give some freedom to our developers in order to change some stuff. In this case, we can provide hooks in the form of CSS custom properties, or otherwise said, CSS variables. We can use them as it follows. For example, if we have a dialog or popover, some kind of container at all, and we have set a background to some variable, and after that we have given that variable some value, wherever someone from the outside changes the CSS variable's value, this will be appointed in our component, and the background of our component would be changed as well. As we already mentioned, styles do not bleed inside of the shadow root, but the only thing that bleeds in is the CSS variables, because they're global. They cannot be scoped to any shadow root. And these were actually the most important things that you should remember when it comes to shadow DOM. The third standard that we're going to take a look now is HTML templates. Basically, the template tag inside of the HTML has been around for quite a while now, but because of some reasons, it's not so popular. Actually, how it is used is very interesting. We can declare a template tag inside of our HTML. And as you can see right here, we have added our code that comes from our site inside of it. The interesting thing about the template tag is that this code will not be rendered by the browser, although it is available in the HTML file. In order to be rendered, some manual work should be done. Now, after we have moved all of our code here from the string template that we previously had, let's take a look at the constructor method of the call button again. Here, what are we doing? First, we should get a reference to the template and more importantly to the content of our template. After that, once we attach the shadow, just like we already did, we can append the template's content inside. As you can see here, we are cloning it recursively because it has some nested elements inside of it. This is basically the way to use HTML templates in your application. And actually, it is the same way that you can use them for building web components. It is pretty straightforward. There are no catches here. So it is very easy to go for it. The fourth web standard that we are going to talk about today is ECMAScript modules. So I think that most of you are already familiar with this way of sharing and reusing code. Anyway, it is 2021 right now, but I'm going to show a quick example, a very simple one, so that if there are some people that are not familiar with it, I might take a look at it, and I think it would be very, very important for them. Now, let's imagine a little more different scenario. Here, on the left side, we have a library that we are building, and on the right side is the main code of our application, the business logic of it. Now let's imagine that we are building a calculator application. On the left, in the library that we are building, we want to have some functions that are some math equations. And on the right side, we are going to use them. This way, we are separating some concerns when it comes to the code separation principle. On the left here, we are implementing the method square. It is quite simple, but it is just for the sake of example. Once we declare it and export it, you can see that before declaring the function square, there is this keyword export. We can after that import it inside of our main.js module. How do we import it? We call the import keyword and we say what do we want to import from the library. In this case, there is only one function that is declared and we are going to import on that. After we have imported the function in our main.js file, we can start using it right away. As you can see in our case, we are just logging the square of 11. There is nothing more going on here, although there are some catches and some interesting stuff here like default exports, named exports, and so on. But I think it is a little bit out of the scope of this lecture about web components. And now, after we have covered all the 4 standards that are responsible for the implementation of web components, I think that it is worth a minute to take a look at the browser support when it comes to all the major browsers. They support stable, implement all the implementations of the given 4 standards. Here, I want to stress out that the edge that we can see on the right represents the Chromium-based edge and not the edge that was developed previously by Microsoft. This table gives you the freedom to use web components in basically every kind of application, even if it is some enterprise application that needs to support various browsers and not just the latest Chrome, for example. Now, after we are some kind well into the topic of web components, let's take a look how the SAP ecosystem benefits from web components. So inside SAP, we've got this product that is called UI5 Web Components, which is basically a library that provides components that you can use in your applications out of the box. It is very convenient because the web components that are provided in this library are really lightweight, which means that they come with a minimum footprint that you can easily add to your application. All the components that are provided by the UI5 Web Components product are implementing the Fiori design language, which is really important for internal SAP products. The consumption of UI5 Web Components is really easy as well. All you need to do is install them from npm where they are deployed. As you might know, all you need to do is just a simple command in order to add them to your project. And after that, you can just import the required component and use it inside of your HTML. One of the biggest benefits when it comes to UI5 Web Components is that they are future-proof. They are future-proof because they are based on a technology that is future-proof. This is the technology of web components that you are now familiar with. And last but definitely not least, all the enterprise features that you might expect will come out of the box once you start using UI5 Web Components. Here we are talking about features like accessibility, theming, and translations. To be honest, there are even some themes that come out of the box which are accessibility related, like high contrast black or high contrast light, for example. It is worth mentioning that the project is absolutely open source. It is hosted on github.com and everyone has access to it. If you're interested, you can always start a discussion or perhaps fire an issue or feature request. If you're willing to contribute, it is always welcome. You can open a pull request at any time. Now, when it comes to the components itself, currently we've got over 60 components and the number of components is growing. The reason for that is very simple. People are unstoppably firing feature requests for new components that they need in their applications. Currently, the project has more than 1,000 stars in our GitHub repo, which is quite impressive, to be honest. Another thing that is worth mentioning is that it has a lot of forks. Basically, there are quite some people that are contributing to our project, which are really outside of it. And right now, when it comes to usage, you can very easily notice that on npm, the weekly downloads are around 6,000 per week, which is quite good for a project that is hosted on npm for an open source project. So this usage that currently is out there is for our latest version, which is 1.0 release candidate 15. As you can see, we've got around 15 release candidates, which means that we are aiming right now for our first stable version, which will be 1.0. This version will be released very soon, so stay tuned about it, and perhaps you can use it in your next application. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure for me to be here with you today. If you have any questions, you can contact me however you like. Here's my work email. You can write to us in the chat as well. It was a pleasure for me. Have a nice day.